Hi, Dr. Reagan Robertson, CCO of Productive Dentist Academy here, and I have a question for you. Are you finding it hard to get your team aligned to your vision, but you know you deserve growth just like everybody else? That's why we've created the PDA Productivity Workshop. For nearly 20 years, PDA workshops have helped dentists just like you align their teams, get control of scheduling, and create productive practices that they love walking into every day. Just imagine how you will feel when you know your schedule is productive, your systems are humming, and your team is aligned to your vision. It's simple, but it's not necessarily easy. We can help. Visit productivedentist.com/workshop. That's productivedentist.com/workshop to secure your seats now.
Consolidation has been happening for the last 15 years or so within the dental world, and really has heated up over the last 10, extremely heated up in the last 5.
Welcome to Investment Grade Practices podcast, where we believe private practice dentists deserve to get the lifestyle today while building an asset for tomorrow. Join your host, Victoria Peterson, to design the practice of your dreams and secure your financial independence. Let's get started.
Welcome, everyone. This is Victoria Peterson, and I am joined by Kyle Francis. I am one of your biggest fans, Kyle. I am so glad that we discovered professional transition services. Thank you for joining me on Investment Grade Practices today.
It's my pleasure. It's been great to get to know y'all as well.
I've been in dentistry for a long time, been a consultant for a long time. I've worked with a lot of transition brokers and strategists, and I think in every field, there's the 95% that do it a certain way, whether you're a dentist or an accountant or a consultant. And then there's that breakout 5% that do things a little bit differently. And at the point that David Port and I reached out to you and started talking to you, we were seriously contemplating doing something foolish like creating our own transition program. And because the 95% just weren't providing that extra piece that you provided. And I'd love for you to share with our audience today, what is your philosophy about helping doctors? Help us understand who professional transition strategies are and your philosophy of doing business.
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, if I can return the compliment, I feel the exact same way about consultants as well.
I was going to say, are you the one that says consultants make value go down?
Oh no, like it really is interesting. Like it is a 95-5 rule completely, and so it's flattering that you said that about my company, but I really do feel the same about y'all. So anyway, whenever we think about the right way of doing a transition, I think that options are key, right? And that the doctors should understand those options sooner rather than later, right? I mean, it's a simple concept, just beginning with the end in mind, right? Which is it's always better to have time on your side whenever you're contemplating these different things. And so whether it is bringing on a partner or bringing on an associate or bringing on a financial partner, right? Or potentially even considering, affiliation or partnership with the DSO, all of those different things can be within the grasp of a doctor. It just, they need to understand what the ins and outs end up looking like, right? And so if I kind of live out what I'm really passionate about, which is going to be helping doctors make a really good decision for their life going forward, my thought is I want to start with all of the information about the practice. And so I think that starts with, getting an appraisal done. And so that way we understand what we're working with, and then we can start to talk through, okay, what is the right way of thinking about this going forward? So, and I say this to all the doctors we end up working with, look, I'm not going to be living it. Right? I'm not going to be living it with them after that transition. And so my thought is if we can set them up with the right types of options to start out with, they'll make the right decision for them at that point. So anyway, that's kind of what our theory is anyway.
Well, I want to put a highlight on that. I see very few brokers who talk about options. What I hear the mainstream narrative is, you're ready to sell your practice, I will find you a buyer. It's very transactional. It's very almost like real estate based mentality. And I've heard a lot of, and there are great, I'm not throwing anybody under the bus here. There are great transition specialists outside your company, but
Completely.
you do things a little different. And this options is one. One of the things you taught me is you've got a great practice. You should host a beauty contest. Like, why would you take the first offer that comes along? You spent 20 years, 30 years of your blood, sweat, and tears. I can get you multiple offers. How do you get doctors multiple offers on their practice?
Yeah, well, so look, this is not a new concept, right? So consolidation has been happening for the last 15 years or so within the dental world, and really has heated up over the last 10, extremely heated up in the last 5. And if you think about it, the way that we've thought about transitions over the course of the last 15 years, to start out with, was going to be originally my very first deal. I had one option for that doctor, which is going to be at some point or another, they're either going to sell all or part of their practice to another dentist, right? Not the worst thing in the world, by the way, right? That can be a good transition way, or a good way of thinking about transitions. However, with the advent of private equity investment into this space, essentially what it's done is it's opened up all sorts of different avenues for that doctor to consider. Yes, there are still individual options to consider, right? Whether you want to sell all or part of a practice to an individual, but you could sell all of a practice to a DSO. You might do a joint venture with them. You might want to have, take some chips off of the table and roll some equity in with them and go into an equity platform that ends up running a lot more smoothly, de-risking yourself at the exact same time, growing faster than what you can currently do. So I would also say competition has been driving this a fair amount as well. At this point, there are now more than 350 different DSOs out there. And what that means is going to be there's 350 different ways of skinning the cat, right? I typically think about groups and DSOs. I don't consider them good or bad. I essentially consider them a reflection of dentistry, right? I think that there are good and bad clinicians out there, and I think there are good and bad DSOs out there, right? And my goal is going to be that if I help doctors make a really good decision on which direction they want to go, hopefully the best DSOs end up winning, right? And that way we can, keep the doctor-patient relationship, at the chair side rather than a numbers guy like me dictating those decisions for the doctors. So anyway, that's again, that's kind of what my thought is. But look, you asked me a specific question. How do we end up getting it? Part of it is competition, right? So understanding that if we put it out to all of the different groups and all the different individuals, that there will be a bidding process on it, right? And it's the exact same thing as if somebody ends up sending you a letter to wanting to purchase your home. The chances are you're not going to be selling it for the top dollar if you just deal with that one individual person, right? If you take it out to the market, what you will end up seeing is going to be the practice or the purchase price will be levered up, right? Just because of just kind of simple supply and demand, right?
Yes.
So because of the consolidation, because of the competition, what we found is going to be, it's actually pretty easy to drive the price point up to what we believe the market price should be on that practice. So
how many practices a year do you look at? Does your team value?
Yeah, so this year we'll do somewhere in the 500 to 600 range.
Wow. So you're looking at 500 potential practices a year. And how many do you take to market? And like some people just aren't ready, right? Sometimes you look at it and say, give this another year or two. Sometimes
very much so.
They're past their prime. Wow, you should have found me a year or two ago. So what do you think is when you hit that sweet spot and you go, wow, this is going to be really fruitful? What is the doctor doing to prepare, and how long? You said give yourself time. It's better to have time on your side. What does that mean?
Well, okay. So first, the answer to your first question is, something around the 250 mark is about how many we'll end up taking to market, of which I would expect, somewhere around half of them to end up actually finding the right deal and closing, right? So maybe call it 150 this year, something like that. In terms of having time on your side, this is my thought process. At some point or another, I'm going to sell this company that I started, right? Whenever I do so, I'm very hopeful that I'll be able to listen to my own advice, have somebody take this business out to market, because there's this funny thing out there called founder syndrome. Are you familiar with that concept at all? Okay, yeah. So founder syndrome is kind of crazy. So I just lived it with my dad, who just sold his last company, right? And so, you start up something or you bought something, and it really kind of becomes kind of like a member of the family to you in a way, right? There's all these kind of emotional heartstring things that end up being ingrained in it. And it's really hard to see the forest through the trees whenever all those heartstrings kind of tied up in an economic decision. So what my thought is that one, we can kind of help see through those different emotions, and then we also are able to help them end up kind of looking at it, purely from a nuts and bolts standpoint, which is going to be, okay, we have this asset, right? Which is going to be, let's say you have $1 million or $2 million practice. That $1 million or $2 million practice, how is it operating right now, right? So do we have costs under control? Is it kind of humming the way that we want it to hum? And then we say, okay, does it make sense to evaluate what types of options you have in terms of a transaction, right? How much longer are you wanting to continue to work? Is it 3 years? Is it 5 years? Is it 10? Right? And then what we can do is we can compare apples to apples, right? Which is we put together a scorecard that essentially breaks down their total financial outcome if they end up thinking about transacting with one of the individuals or groups. And then what happens if you just keep on rocking it by yourself, right? Because that's still a completely and totally viable option, right? And then finally, does it make sense to do some work on the practice before you end up bringing it to market, right? We end up having the conversation quite often that says, okay, well, your lab and supplies are out of control. Looks like your payroll is just as much so. If we end up bringing it to market, somebody is going to be giving you a lower offer than what you could get potentially in the next year or two if you do the work on the practice. Now, does that mean that you end up raising revenue in order to make it commensurate with the cost structure? Does that mean that you need to cut some costs? Look, we can give advice on that kind of stuff. We're not the implementation experts. That's where y'all come in, right? Anyway, that's I think that having that type of conversation is a valuable one, because if you have it sooner rather than later, you aren't just stuck, saying, "Hey, I want to sell my practice in the next 6 months." At that point, it does just become a transaction.
Yeah. And gosh, this is so rich. You bring up so many great points here. Every week, my team and I have conversations with our clients that say, what is your cash flow need in retirement? What is, what will you need to be ready for the 30 years after you hang up the handpiece? And even if you're 70 and you don't think you're going to live to 100, let's think about what would the next 30 years look like. And we help them get to that financial freedom number, that infinity number where your money's going to outlive you and you've got something to pass along, or spend it all now. So the kids don't get such
yeah.
But this piece about beginning with the end in mind, knowing where I could be or want to be in 5 years, knowing, like you said, should I buy, sell, or hold? On an interview we did recently with our client, Clint Hughes, he and I were going through this. He said, I got an unsolicited offer and it was a pretty darn good offer. What should I do? And we walked through it and we put it into our financial freedom calculator. Like, your practice historically is growing like this. Do you think it's going to still grow like this? Absolutely. We're expanding, blah, blah, blah. And I said, so if you sold to a DSO, this is how it's going to grow, because they're not about growth. They're about maintaining cash flow. So maybe you won't expand. Maybe this won't happen. That won't happen. This is what the buyout could look like. And he goes, well, okay, well, that's still not a bad deal, but what are they going to bring to the table? I've got a great office manager. She's aligned with my vision. I work Tuesday, Wednesday, and every other Thursday. My wife is in the practice. She works Mondays, Thursdays, and every other Friday. Like we're cherry. We're working 2.5 days a week. We got an office manager. We're expanding. Cash flow is great. What would they bring to us that we don't already have?
Right.
And I said, exactly. And he goes, well, I'm 44 years old. Is it okay if I just keep doing this for the next 15 years? I said, sure.
Yeah, completely.
But you don't know when you get that letter in the mail, know. And I love that you compared that. If you got a letter in the mail, because I get them all the time, we're looking for houses in your neighborhood to sell. I'm like, well, you're crazy. I'm not selling my house. But we get those letters for our business, and sometimes panic sets in, like, maybe I should. And this is so good. I love that you take such a methodical approach to it. I love the concept of the scorecard that includes where do you want to be emotionally? What else is going on in your life? What are your values? Where do you need to be financially? And really pulling together more than just you've got 5 operatories, 3,000 patients of record, and this EBITDA, therefore your practice is worth that. I'll come out, take a few photos, and we'll throw it on the market.
Right. Well, I mean, quite frankly, it's just not very intellectually stimulating either, right? Whenever you think about it that way, it's just kind of a boring type of deal. But maybe to follow through on what you were talking about with the letter, I remember early on in my career, I was asked to speak at a couple different dental schools and about just kind of how to buy a practice, right? So what I'm seeing out there, those kind of things. And one of the pieces of advice that I used to give was going to be, look, if you want to go to a certain place, a really smart thing to do, if I were in your shoes, what I would do is I would send out a whole bunch of letters, right? I would just send out letters like crazy and see if you can get a bite. And the reason being is twofold. One, you'll have options, right? And then thing two is most likely you're going to get a good deal, right? If you end up doing that, because you're kind of usurping the market in a way, right? And so whenever you think about the DSOs going out and, sending out letters and communications directly to doctors, they're just taking that strategy, which by the way, is in their best interest, right? Yeah. They should. If you're thinking about buying something, you want to buy it for as less as you can, right? And if you have to compete, then you have to compete, right? But essentially, whenever I think about the types of processes that we run, I know for sure that the other practices that group has bought, on their own are helping fund my transaction, right? I know for sure they are, right? And so, and that's a good thing for the clients that we have. And look, here's the thing: it's not like the other doctors didn't get a good deal or a deal that they wanted or anything like that. But the chances that they were able to make the market on it, look, that group has done that 100 times, and you've now sold your first practice, right? It's just a little bit of a different type of agency there.
And that's one of the things we're doing with our IGP platform and teaching doctors how to become investment grade. There's a difference between business value and cash flow. There's a difference between lifestyle and decreasing stress and all of that. We love all of that, but that's in this box called practice optimization. That's in a box called culture index, marketing, all of those things. You're bringing in this fourth box of there are new market influences that you don't even know about that are creating value that you could take advantage of.
Yep.
And I want to talk about that for a minute, because explaining this to our coaches and explaining it to some of our clients, I said, have you ever traveled to a foreign country and you experience where the dollar is worth, 1.5 yen or 1.3 pesos, or, it's worth more or less. So think about currencies. It changed value because you crossed a border. Mm-hmm. And so go back to equity platform. You talked about that. That's something that we're working on with you to help like-minded dentists come together, because in the new vocabulary of buying and selling, it is about EBITDA, it's about multiple of EBITDA, and it creates this equity arbitrage, this currency exchange, if you will. It's more valuable in one place than it is another. So can you talk about equity platforms and how that changes value for a doctor?
Okay, so first of all, I'm definitely stealing that currency exchange. I have not heard it talked about that way, and that's good. That's really, really good. So, okay. So whenever I think about,
I just got fangirl on you here for a minute.
That's awesome. That was good. That was really good. Okay, so typically whenever I think about equity arbitrage, so 15 years ago, doctors didn't have this option, right? So 15 years from now, we're going to be consolidated, also won't have this option. So I think about it in this.
So this is a special window of time.
It is. It's very unique, right? So it's the exact same thing that happened in the 1980s with medical practices, right? And so if you look at the type of consolidations happening there, it's just not the same, right? And the reason it's taken so much longer in dentistry is going to be because dentistry is very, very, very hard to consolidate. You got all of these mom and pop dentists out there. You didn't have these huge orthopedic groups that in Colorado Springs, there were 2 orthopedic groups out there, right? So if I look at it this way, I think of equity arbitrage in terms of risk and in terms of reward. So from a risk standpoint, let's say the practice is kind of like Apple stock, right? Apple stock grows really nicely, provides a really nice return for anybody who holds it. However, it's still inherently risky, right? The risk is going to be that you're still betting on one company, right? So whenever you think about diversifying risk, you think about buying a mutual fund, right? A mutual fund is great, provides a nice return, however, typically not as high as the potential return of owning that singular stock, right? If you look at the original DSO deals out there, essentially kind of all the old school ones, all of them had this kind of characteristic to it, which is going to be, I'm diversifying my risk, I'm taking chips off the table, maybe I can put a little bit of equity into this vehicle, but primarily I'm just diversifying risk here, right? And that can be a good way of thinking about like the older style deals. And we still have people that choose that type of deal as well, by the way. Now, what happens during consolidation or during competition is going to be essentially more carrots get thrown in, right? And so instead of just diversifying your risk, now you can put large chunks of equity into those types of platform, or only sell a certain percentage of your practice and have the other percentage that you have be worth way more, like your currency exchange idea, right? Essentially what it does is it allows the doctor to be a private equity investor within either their own practice or within a group of practices, which again is a lot less risky, right? So if it grows faster and provides less risk, man, you could be cooking with gas, right? And so we see a lot of dramatic outcomes from that type of thinking.
And like you said, in the original versions, groups and private equity and DSOs, they were kind of aggregated around geography. You would see them kind of locus in to an area, right? Yep. And Wisconsin's a great example of that. It's probably one of the first DSO areas, and they've got cherries and apples and mids and everything is out there. And that was my competition that was actually why when I started buying practices from solo doctors, they were like, you're not a big DSO, therefore I like you. Right. Then they figured out I was not a dentist, I was a hygienist. And they were like, what the heck? I just sold my practice to a hygienist. There was like there was some OG stuff going on there. And they were like, I can't believe this. And so that was kind of fun. But what I'm hearing you say is that geography is not necessarily needed to be on an equity platform. What I need is a group of like-minded people. Let's say that clinically your clinical ethos is the same. Like I'm a general dentist who loves comprehensive care, and you've got a philosophy of care, and that's all kind of standard and congruent across everybody that's on the platform. The accounting is the same, so that everything's normalized and you don't have to get a highlighter and Sharpie marker just to figure out what your profit is each month. Hiring practices, culture, things like that. So you can align in that way so that when a private equity investor, so this is a different type of buyer persona. So I want to sell to an individual doctor looking for a lifestyle. I'm selling to an investor looking for cash flow on a product, essentially. So you want that 10 or 20 practices to look, act, feel similar, but they don't have to be exactly the same Stepford wife robotic. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, very much so. I guess, look, what we're looking for are going to be, what ties do we have, right? What are the different ties within that, organization or group or whatever else? Some of those ties could be geographic, right? So, I mean, geography does matter in some way, shape, or form. And so, if you band together, practices from a geographic standpoint, do you get benefit from a marketing standpoint or from, potentially regional managers? It's easier to put regional managers in that type of platform. Yeah. So there are reasons to consider geography, but I would also say there's, plenty of groups out there that have done very, very well being completely and totally geographically agnostic, right? They're going around and looking for the right type of practice, the right type of practitioner, right? If they end up finding those types of practices and practitioners, will they go to Alaska? Sure. Will they go to Maine? Absolutely. No big deal, right. And maybe it's the same group going both those directions, So anyway, I think it's all about ties and stories. So yes, whether it's, a clinical ethos, whether it's going to be, type of practice that you like to run, whether it's going to be, the payer mix that is going to be kind of standardized, or whether it's going to be all of these practices really, really love doing all on 4 cases, right? Or whatever the case is. So there's lots of different ties that you can get. And I think the key is going to be, how can you tell a story around those ties in order to make the right decision going forward?
Okay, let's put an example in here so that listeners that may be thinking about selling in the next 2 to 5 years, or heck, maybe even next year, but somewhere in the next 7 years, this is in their future. If I had, let's call it a $1.2 million practice, and I had about 20% net profit, EBITDA, so I'm pulling down 240,000.
Yep.
What might my practice be valued, just ballparking today? And I know I'm giving you only one data point. What would it be worth today compared to if that same practice came together with other like-minded and created an equity platform? Show us what equity arbitrage really means. Show us what this currency exchange really looks like.
Yeah. So let's start at the beginning, which is going to be, let's say that practice is sold to an individual, right? If that practice is sold to an individual, you take the typical rule of thumb, which is we call it 75% of, total collections, those kind of things. And suddenly you're looking at something that looks more like, the $900,000 range, right? So that's the old way of doing it. Again, if there's $900,000 sitting on the ground, most people are going to pick it up, right? If you end up going with, what I would consider, a private equity backed group in some way, shape, or form, whether it's directly to private equity or to a private equity backed organization. Let's say you go directly with them, or maybe you hire a company like mine to take you out to market and to kind of show you what those options could look like. Typically we're going to be looking somewhere around, call it, 5-6 times type of deal, right? 6 times type of deal, $240,000 times 6, you end up looking at call like 1.4 million, something like that. Again, so if you look at the difference,
that's an extra 500,000. I like that.
Yeah, the delta there is nice, right? So we have a lot of folks that end up making those types of decisions, and it works out very, very nicely for them. Now, here's the thing, though. It's not just picking up the additional $500,000, $600,000. The real thing is going to be, what can you now do with that equity, right? So if you end up taking, call it $1 million off the table, and you still have $600,000 worth of practice value, what you can do is you can reinvest it in their platform, or potentially keep a percentage of your own practice, right? And now that percentage that you've kept, or that percentage that you've rolled forward, grows enormously faster than what you would experience otherwise. Typical equity platforms grow at something like 80% year on year, right? So over the course of a 5-year time horizon, it multiplies by 5. Take that $600,000, multiply it by 5. $3 million. Add that the $1 million that you got day one. We've just taken your asset that was worth $900,000 in a different environment and changed it to an asset that's now worth $4 million, right? That's obviously an enormous deal. Now let's put it on steroids, right? So we put it on steroids. The way we do that is going to be, if we end up kind of maybe binding together like-minded dentists, right? And we end up bringing together, 10, 20, 30 practices simultaneously, it's worth way more to a private equity group. The reason being is they don't have to go around and pick off each one individually. It takes a lot of time, effort, and energy to do that. And time is the biggest thing. They only have use of those funds for like a 5-year time horizon. They need to be efficient with their time in order to make this work. So if you bind together like-minded practices, the total outcome can end up being, instead of like a 6 times deal to start out with, you can get a 9 or a 10 times deal to start out with. Now, again, what you did, you take that $240,000, let's call it times 10. So you now have $2.4 million that you
instead of 1.4.
Instead of 1.4. Yep. So
because I said, Kyle, you and I get along, why don't we sell together or be on a similar platform together? That's all we have to do is say, I like you, you like me. We work together nicely. But you're not going to come and tell me what to do, and I'm not going to come and tell you what to do. Yep. But we're on the same platform together.
Yep. You're working together.
So there's value in the collaboration. There's value in the agreement of standardize. So you don't have to scale your individual practice 10 times. You join others and you scale together.
There you go. Yep. And now the coolest part about this is going to be, let's say you take the exact same amount off the table day one, you take that $1 million off the table day one, you now have $1.4 million in that new equity platform, right? The new equity platform grows by 5 times, right? And suddenly you're looking at something that is going to be worth, $7 million over that same time horizon. You take that initial $1 million. So we now have an $8 million deal that essentially all we could have gotten before this consolidation event was going to be just under $1 million. So look, this is not a unicorn type of story. You've seen it a lot, right? 450 transactions under my belt. I've seen it a bunch. And so my thought is it worthwhile to at least consider? I think the answer is yes, right? And so does that mean that you end up choosing that way? No, absolutely not. One of my favorite stories, if you have a minute, is going to be, we worked with a pediatric dentist in Georgia, really, really nice practice, $2.6 million and single provider. So he's hoofing it, right? He's going. And we had all sorts of really good offers from DSOs, right? And really, whenever he looked at everything, he's like, yeah, you know what? But that's not really what I want. I just want somebody to live life with, And so we ended up finding an individual doctor from Washington in order to move him across the country. And ended up buying into that practice at, what we would consider a market rate. Now, here's the thing. The guy who sold didn't make the wrong decision, right? He made the right decision, and he made the right decision for him. Now, were there more financially consequential type of things that he could have done? Absolutely. But that's not what he was looking for. So my thought is that, again, if you have the full gamut to choose from, it'll make the right decision more apparent.
I think that's paramount too, because we brought David Port, who's been a great friend of mine and Bruce's for many, many years. And in his PhD study and I think it's the only study that's out there right now, but he spent 6 years studying DSOs, consolidation. But the specific point of view is, what was the career satisfaction for young dentists going in as associates and for doctors who were selling into? And really, it came down to core value alignment. Are my values aligned with your values? And I think it's beyond justified that you say, I want to align with something that aligns with me. I want to preserve the legacy here. I want to have resources for the community that are ongoing in this particular way. And so money is not always that factor. But what I love about this so much, and if I heard you correctly, is that as a practitioner owner, I don't have to work any more days. I don't have to hustle my bustle. There are probably some things that I can optimize, but literally, when I understand this new framework that's here for a window of time, I can understand that there are financial, I call it magic. There's just banking magic and currency exchange magic. Because I went to Tijuana, my money is worth more. You go from solo practitioner to platform, then my value could go from 900,000 to 8 million over time. That's building generational wealth.
Really?
Right? That's making sure your kids are taken care of, because that's beyond taking sweat equity out of your practice. And I'm so glad that's here. How long do you think this window is going to stay open?
So
that's a magical crystal ball question.
Yeah. So right now we're about 30% consolidated as an industry. There's a little bit of variance there. Some people are saying more, under 30%. Some people are saying 35%. I'll call it in the middle, right? So 30% consolidated. There's a lot of really good research out there that shows that we're going to get to something like 60 to 70% consolidated. And there's a lot of comps for that as well. But the speed at which we go has ramped up, right? And so what I would say is, maybe a 7-year time horizon, right? Which is going to be something like, a turn and a half or 2 turns of private equity is about what we have remaining. And I think from there we'll be in stasis, which again, it's not a bad thing to own a piece of a DSO or a piece of your practice after that point. It's not like it's going to be a bad thing, but is it going to be as dramatic of an exit? No, it won't be at that point. So
it'll be predictable.
Yeah, exactly. Completely. So dentistry is an extraordinarily predictable thing, which is why private equity is interested in it, right? So if you think about, I will teach private equity funds how to invest in dentistry and why to. And one of the things we end up talking about is going to be, look, if the dentist tells somebody to brush their teeth and they don't, what are they going to get? They're going to get a cavity, right? If they don't get the cavity filled, they're going to end up needing a crown. If they don't get the crown done, they're going to need endo. If they don't get the endo done, they're going to need to have the tooth pulled. And if they want to have any sort of function, you either have to get a bridge or you have to get an implant going forward, right? And each thing ends up becoming more and more and more expensive, right? Not only that, but also what are the chances that that patient is going to take out pliers and pull out their own tooth, right? It's probably not going to happen, right? So they like that recurring revenue, right? And it can be a very, very safe investment going forward. It's just interesting that right now we're in that place where the platforms themselves are the things creating the value just because of the scale, right? And as an eventuality, it goes back to more of that safe investment. Right now, it grows very, very fast. Yeah.
Well, thank you for being part of our education team and helping us build the IGP platform, because I think we've worked with so many amazing dentists over time that looking back, they go, wow, I think I built an investment grade practice. It runs like clockwork. It's got great cash flow, and now I'm struggling. Do I sell all or part to my associate? What does that look like? I'm not ready to retire. What do I do? So that's what we're going to be doing in September. I am so thrilled that you're going to be there as one of our speakers on faculty with us. Full panel discussion. We're talking transitions. We've got CPAs and accounting and what we're on the tax side of the equation. We haven't even touched that today. So our good friend Chris Sands will be there for that. We've got our friends from Dentist Advisors, talking about what is your financial freedom number and should you do a 401k or double down on your practice and all of those it's very complex. And I'll say, since I came into dentistry, I won't even tell you when, the options are bigger and your board of advisors must be better. My uncle is a CPA, may not get you there. My neighbor's kid is a graphic designer. It's not going to get you there. And I just think that that's my passion. That's my mission, is to level the playing field for solo private practitioners who really deserve all the benefits that's happening with these bigger groups, because it's not unavailable. It's a matter of education and understanding the risk and understanding how to minimize that risk through smart decision making. And it's less difficult today than it was in 2011 when I was starting a group. There was very little information out. It was hard. It was behind closed doors. Couldn't get to people like you.
Really, at that point, we didn't even know what a DSO was, really. I remember the practices that we called them umbrella corporations, right? And the umbrellas were all those things. And so
they were called the corporates.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah. It is. The world has changed a lot in the last 10 years.
Well, Kyle, this has been a delight. I know that I'm going to have you back for round 2 and round 3 and round 4 as the seasons of this podcast continue. You are a treasure of information, and I'm really thankful that you made it so accessible and use such great imagery to help us understand what all of this means.
Well, it was my pleasure. I love our conversations, and I can't wait to have more of them.
I love it. We're going to put your contact information in our show notes, but is there a particular way that people can reach out to get more information?
By all means, go to professionaltransition.com. We'll have all of our contact information there. You can find us on Facebook and all the different social medias, all that kind of stuff. So, but yeah, I think the easiest way is by just going to the website.
Perfect.
Yep.
Have a wonderful day, Kyle.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Investment Grade Practices Podcast. If you find value in this episode, help us spread the word by passing it along to a dental friend, subscribe, and give us a like on iTunes or Spotify. Learn more about building your investment grade practice at productivedentist.com today.